Thank you very much, Emily, and a fantastic introduction to permitting as an imperative to tackle. Next, we're going to go to an imperative discussion around tap the subsurface. Today, we're honored to be joined by Undersecretary of Energy Haustveit, who oversees responsibilities including energy dominance finance, hydrocarbons, and geothermal, and the CEO of Devon Energy, one of the country's leading oil and gas producers, Gaspar, and Carlos Araque, CEO of Quaise, one of the country's leading geothermal companies that's advancing new technologies to do enhanced geothermal energy production. Chris Barnard will be leading the discussion. He's president of the American Conservation Coalition. And this discussion, we anticipate, will be a wide-ranging conversation around what we need to do to launch the next series of innovations in the subsurface that's already made such an impact in the American energy political economy. Please welcome them to the stage.
Awesome. Thank you, Isaiah. Welcome to the first panel of this year's Energy Imperative Summit. We are going to be talking about the subsurface. I think a lot of the buzz in energy these days tends to think about what's above the ground, right? Like nuclear, batteries, wind, solar, and that excitement is all great. But I think it's also important to start by acknowledging the reality that the subsurface really has been America's asymmetric energy advantage on the world stage. The fracking boom is truly what made America an energy independent nation and an exporter. But it's not just that. It's not just what we've done in the last few decades. It's also what we're doing over the next few decades. And so we're going to be talking about some exciting developments, both in the oil and gas industry, but also in new industries like advanced geothermal. Joined here today, you already heard the names, but to reiterate, got Clay Gaspar, the CEO of Devon Energy, Undersecretary for Energy recently confirmed, so congratulations, Kyle Haustveit, and then the CEO of Quaise Energy, Carlos Araque. We intentionally had both the public sector and the private sector on this panel, and so that's one of the themes that I really want to tease out in this panel. Clay, let me start with you. Obviously, you lead Devon, which has been at the forefront, especially when it comes to the fracking boom. Could you tell us what that story has been? And also, I'd love to get your thoughts on what the kind of private-public partnerships were that helped shape that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate being here, and thanks everyone for attending. We're a 50-plus-year-old company in a 150-year-old industry that's really at the heart of it, providing energy to fuel modern life. And so when you think about that charge, we're Devon Energy. We're not Devon Oil or Devon Natural Gas. We really think about the holistic, how do we provide energy to fuel every other industry out there. Specific to the unconventional resources in the oil and gas world, we've been producing oil on the planet for 150 years now, but sometime around 2005, the U.S. kind of troughed in its production. We're at about 4.7 million barrels a day, and at the time we were pretty far down the list of world's producers. If we would have continued down that line, now we'd probably somewhere be in the order of around 3 million barrels today. But there was this spark, this revolution that happened really right here in the U.S. that really changed the game, not just for the U.S., but for the entire world. And that really originated in a few plays. One of the plays that we were involved in was the Barnard Shale, just outside of Dallas-Fort Worth. And a company called Mitchell Energy had really started drilling horizontal wells and really kind of almost bullheadedly saying, we're going to figure out how to get this gas that we know is in this rock out. And everyone say, no, you can't do that. Well, they did. They had a good, productive run. And then when Devon bought Mitchell in 2002, we introduced hydraulic fracturing to the equation, and that really unlocked natural gas production. Follow on to that were places like the Williston Basin, where some really smart, inventive people applied that same technology to oil and really unlocked oil. And then today, on the back of that, the U.S. is now the world's largest producer, over 13 million barrels a day. And by the way, when you think about energy security and you think about the comparisons to other countries, number 2 and number 3 on that list are Russia and Saudi. And when you think about what's going on in the geopolitical space around the world today, if we were a 3 million barrel producer begging Russia and Saudi for oil production to fuel our economy, we're in a very different negotiating tack than we are today. So there's a lot to that question. There's a lot I'm incredibly proud of. But what I look forward to getting to today is not just the history, but where do we go from here? Because it's incredibly bright future from where we're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of where we go from here, Undersecretary Haustveit, would love to get your thoughts on, like Clay mentioned, 2005 kind of being a pivotal point in American energy history. Are we at another pivotal point? Like, what does the future of the subsurface look like? How does the DOE fit into that?
Yes, and thank you for building the history, Clay. I think it's important to highlight that this transformative energy that we've been producing for 2 decades that changed the scope of the US landscape, changed the scope of the global landscape, is a culmination of less than 10% of the oil that's in place, maybe less than 40% of the natural gas that's in place in these unconventional reservoirs. So to say that we're in the late innings, I think is a miscategorization of the shale revolution. I think we're going to be shifting gears and refocusing. But if we take the oil recovery in these unconventionals from 10% to 20%, we repeat the shale revolution. We all know that to earn the title revolution, it has to be truly revolutionary. So I believe we will enter that next phase over the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see some companies that have a little bit longer runway for their primary inventory. They'll keep drilling, and they should. That's probably a higher rate of return in the near term. But we're going to see more and more companies look at these assets that they've already leased, they've already drilled wells, they've built the infrastructure, and they're going to say, we are not okay with only recovering 10% of the oil in place. So I think the next revolution is round two of shale, and we're going to see a dramatic improvement in the recovery factor in these resources.
So shale is obviously a big part of the subsurface story. But Carlos, would love to get your thoughts as the founder and CEO of an advanced geothermal startup. Right now, we have a few gigawatts of geothermal at best. DOE has talked about getting to hundreds of gigawatts. I've heard you talk about terawatts, right? Like, what is it going to take for us to get there? What's the landscape that you're seeing?
So at Quaise Energy, we see geothermal in a very different way. I come from oil and gas, and I apply an oil and gas lens to Quaise. To me, geothermal is a bigger resource by every metric than oil and gas, and I say that very decisively. It is not today, but it can be and it will be. To put it in perspective, Clay was talking about the shale revolution taking us from 5 to 13 million barrels of oil per day, and that transforms the possibilities in this country. And most of those shale wells will produce roughly about 50 to 100 barrels of oil per day. So we need to drill and have many of them to come up with that 13 million number. Geothermal not only has the potential to match those with enhanced geothermal systems, and there's companies out there starting to do that and showing that, but as you dial up the temperatures, roughly double the temperatures, you 10x the power output per well. So now every geothermal well not only matches a mature shale well, but matches a shale well when it's brand new, producing 10 times as much energy. So Clay, how would you like to have every single one of your oil well producing 10 times the power? It'd be transformative. We wouldn't be talking about a 13 million barrel of oil per day nation. We would be talking about a 100 million barrel of oil per day nation. What is that? What does that enable for this country and our ability to do things here and around the world? So that's what we're going for. This is geothermal at terawatt scale. Dial up the temperature, roughly two times the temperature, 10 times the power output, and you dramatically transform what that energy resource can be and will be. We're building the first one already in Oregon. So this is possible today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me bridge it together. So Clay shared the history. That was a beautiful story of George Mitchell ruthlessly pursuing unlocking this asset against the recommendation of his board. His executive leadership team kept telling him, stop wasting the money, it's not going to work. And we had innovators that kept fighting through to make it happen. On the geothermal side, a very similar crowd of voices were around some of these early innovators saying, there's no way you can't drill horizontal wells in this type of rock. You'll have too many losses. Even if you can drill horizontally, you'll never be able to frack the rock. Even if you can frack the rock, you'll never be able to maintain connectivity between wells. So I want to encourage, I see there's a lot of young people. Don't listen to the naysayers right away, because we know that people will tell us all the reasons we can't. But over and over again, we've seen American innovation, American ingenuity prove the haters wrong and unlock unbelievable resource over and over again. When we pitched investing in geothermal at an oil and gas company, the title slide was the company we invested in. I'm trying to be government correct here, the title of the company we invested in, and under that, the subtitle was The Mitchell Energy of Geothermal. And that's all we had to say. We didn't even have to read the deck. What that title slide told the executive team was, there's a resource in place that lacks the natural permeability to produce at commercial rates. We know how to solve that problem. So that's why I'm so excited about oil and gas, because we've only tapped 10% of it, and why I'm really excited about geothermal, because we have the tools to unlock this resource at scale.
So let me stick with you for a second. Obviously, we need the older companies and the newer companies to work together. But DOE played a pretty critical role early on in the shale boom, right? There's early R&D dollars. There was public-private partnerships. What have you, like? I guess maybe talk a little bit about that, and then talk about how you guys are thinking about unlocking everything else that you're working on right now.
Things take time. So the first well that was hydraulically fractured was in the 50s. Right? The first wells that had slight deviations were before that time with wooden whipstocks. So it wasn't like it was this brand new two concepts combined at the same time. It was like when we took suitcases and added wheels to it. It took us decades to figure that out. There's a lot of these components of technologies that need to be combined and leveraged. They're existing, they're proven, and we've seen that take place. So way back when, there were carrots before the shale revolution, right? The carrots started with deep gas tax credits. Go down deeper, lower permeability, gas that we know is less economic. How do we go incentivize operators to figure out how to make it economic? So the shale revolution wasn't an all of a sudden. It was a culmination of a lot of small efforts and opportunities that stacked upon themselves, combined with a perfect market dynamic where we needed more gas, and we needed it in the US. But at that time, there was multiple hydraulic fracturing test sites. These are DOE-funded subsurface laboratories to go figure out, how do we break the rock? How can we break it more efficiently and effectively to maximize the economic return of these resources? We've had those HFTS sites ongoing for decades, and they will continue on. We'll continue to look for opportunities to invest in operators who are solving the hardest problems. We recently announced the largest geothermal funding opportunity at DOE, $171 million. And a big portion of that is field demonstrations. We believe the labs are absolutely critical, but we're at a stage in the life of geothermal where field demonstrations are essential. We have got to prove well space and completion design, understand thermal decline, because we're moving into a stage where a lot of capital is going to be needed. And before capital will come into the market, it needs certainty. And thermal decline is a technical term, but it's one of the most important components of geothermal that we do not yet have a full handle on. That thermal decline is just like our oil and gas decline curves in shales. Without knowing the thermal decline, you won't know the cash flow profile. Without knowing the cash flow profile, you will lack major investment. So we'll continue to make investments from the low technology readiness levels 1 through 3 in the laboratories. We've created these centers of excellence that are meant to be a front door for industry to come to the labs to make sure we're solving industry problems that matter and have commercial viability. That TRL 4 through 7, that's where our grants exist. I mentioned the geothermal one. There will be future geothermal funding opportunities. The Forge site in Utah was monumental. A lot of the companies that are making waves today learn from that field demonstration site. We continue to learn from that demo site. We're circulating fluid now to help with that thermal decline. And then we've got the energy dominance financing. Greg Beard and his team, that's that 8 and 9. That's commercial scale, ready to go, low cost of capital to help these companies make the investments to scale at field level. So lots of levers.
Yeah, that's awesome. Clay, I love what you mentioned about Devon being an energy company, right? It reminds me a little bit of the BP changing their name from British Petroleum to British Power, which that one might have been more of a marketing gimmick. But for you guys, I feel like it's really in the DNA, right? And so I'm curious, like, what are you guys working on? I know you've done a lot in geothermal, like that's an area that you're increasingly growing in. But what are the exciting things that you guys are investing in? What are you building? Like, talk to us a little bit about Devon's work right now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the Undersecretary's restriction on what he can say, but I can tell you this: we had a really impressive engineer that worked for us, and he presented a slide that said the company's name, and the company was Fervo, and he presented it as the next Mitchell. So these are opportunities that we see. We think about, the expertise that we have. We're pretty pragmatic about, we're not the answer to everything, but there's some things we're really, really good at. And when we think about unlocking this geothermal potential, we think about horizontal drilling, We think about geology, geophysics, land work. We think about horizontal completion technology, building facilities, and then ultimately marketing electrons rather than molecules. But we can figure that part out. I mean, to me, the hard part, the unlocking, the science part, is really like way inside of our wheelhouse. And so it's something that we've leaned into. We've been a great partner to Fervo. They're amazingly successful. We're doing some things on our own that's really right in line with them, working with the DOE to unlock additional potential, but really also thinking about how do we really unlock energy for domestic use, but also around the world. It's incredibly fundamental. I think about the parallels between energy poverty and really unlocking that. I think about the parallels between energy security and national security. And to me, that's much higher callings than just how do we produce a lot of oil or gas or even make money for the shareholders. That's critical and fundamental. That's what we do. That's how we stay in business. Our investors are our owners and we deliver them a return. But what is it that what's the ambitious? What's the mountain that we're really going after? And I think about that, providing energy to fuel modern life is kind of our tagline, and we're super passionate about it.
Yeah, we spent a few weeks ago, we had a day or two together in Texas with a few other CEOs, and it reminded me of something that you said, Carlos, backstage, which is something to the effect of, like, I think there's a mindset for people when they think about, like, energy CEOs, that they have, like, a religiously dogmatic perspective on their particular source of energy, right? But what you said is, like, well, they care about energy broadly and what comes after energy, like Governor Cox mentioned, right? Like, energy is a conduit to something better, like human flourishing, national security, economic opportunity, the American dream. All of that is downstream from energy. You've talked plenty of times about how you're an oil and gas guy that is now doing advanced geothermal. And there's so much connectivity between those industries and the skills that are transferable and all that. So talk to me a little bit about how you kind of see that development and what you think is possible for the industry.
Yeah, so I think it maps very clearly. When you think about drilling, completing, stimulating, doing all of the subsurface work for oil and gas or geothermal, there's a very close correlation between the two things. So I fully believe that geothermal has a terawatt potential because of that reason, because oil and gas is a terawatt developer around the world. It's been doing that for more than 50 years. So if you were able to repurpose that towards geothermal, you have a terawatt resource right there and there. Now, economics are important. So to me, the ability to fit the risk-reward returns of typical oil and gas projects is going to be foundational to doing this at speed. Let me put it this way. The day a geothermal development matches or exceeds the economic and power output of an oil and gas project, the world changes forever. That's what we're after. We're going for that economic and power parity. Again, it comes down to temperatures. Thermal is the resource here. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show the world a flow test. A flow test is an injector or producer, a fracture network in between the two that matches the power output and the economic pathway to oil and gas parity. Because at that point, the oil and gas company industry in the world, the oil field services and the developers of the world will start wanting to do that for a living in addition to what they do in oil and gas. And because they have a terawatt supply chain infrastructure, regulatory framework, asset base, human capital base, the rest just happens at a speed that you cannot possibly imagine being replicated by any other energy source. So I'm a little bit dogmatic about geothermal, but because I come from oil and gas, I see that pathway very clearly. And it's about unlocking the economics and the power output parity.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. A question for all three of you, and a slight twist, I guess, for the government guy versus the private sector guys. What do you want from each other, right? Like you're sitting here as a startup, a well-established company. What do you need from the government for you to be more successful? And then you on the government side, what do you need from these companies for you to actually be able to, like, empower them to be the best version of themselves?
I've got a quick two. One is engage with our national labs, leverage these centers of excellence. If we're solving problems that matter to industry, we're solving problems that have commercial viability. The second one is when we put out funding or we have these loan program authorities, use them. We need high quality applicants to take these dollars and put them to work to unlock the next revolution. So engage, engage, engage. The more we know about the problems of industry, the better job we can do in providing the right funding opportunities and guide our scientists in the national labs to develop these breakthroughs.
Yeah, well, the buzz on around this town right now is all about permit reform, and we've had several meetings on the Hill and lots of very interesting, influential people. And what I keep pressing on them is there is no shortage of natural gas on the planet, and there's no shortage of demand and use for natural gas on the planet. The challenge is the infrastructure in between the two. And for the U.S. to unlock that potential puts us in such a dominant position for domestic use, whatever power needs we have, and then also helping out friends and allies around the planet in some really challenging times. So I think that, to me, if I get one wish, it's permit reform, allowing us to connect the dots between supply and demand. And that's all forms. Again, I'll go back to, I'm pro-energy, and that means all forms of energy needs to have the ability, if it's a viable project, people are willing to put dollars to work, they should be able to do that. Again, held to an exceptionally high standard. There are the do's and the don'ts. But this idea of an inevitable block and the uncertainty, not just for a year or two, but 5 years, 10 years plus on some of these projects, just kills the economics. And it just prevents some of this from our ability to deliver energy to its rightful uses.
Let's build. Let's build some of these radical projects, right? We're not talking about science fiction. We're talking about reaching to something that's remarkably transformational. We're building a project in Oregon. It will be the world's first super hot geothermal power plant. It's doable there, right? How about we do one in the middle of the country? How about we do one in the east of the country, right? It takes government support to fill in some of the technical gaps and some of the research and development that will apply towards commercial. It takes developers. It doesn't take one company, it takes multiple parties. But rolling up our sleeves and building these things, because the potential and the promise is enormous. We have a lead in subsurface technologies around the world. We can 10x that lead. That I cannot see another pathway to 10xing our lead right now in energy. But that may be fusion, will take a little bit of time. But that is clearly a pathway right there. So let's build, that's what I will continue to pitch the Undersecretary and the government and the DOE and the private sectors like Devon Energy is let's build this. Let me take the risk as a junior developer. I'll convince my venture capitalists to give me the risk money, and I'll show the unlock, and then let's scale it from there.
A fun stat, just again to try to connect the oil and gas and geothermal side. On a slow year, U.S. oil and gas will drill about 10,000 horizontal wells. Current temperatures at 200 C, we can see about a net 2.5 megawatts per well on average. I say per well because you have an injector producer. So the producer's around 5. So if you split it by 2, just some quick math here, about 2.5 megawatts net per well. If we drilled the same number of geothermal wells as we do oil and gas wells in 1 year, that's 25 gigawatts. That's 6 times more than we currently have installed at about 4 gigawatts in 1 year. We weren't drilling horizontal wells and stimulating them 25 years ago. So it seems unrealistic today, but look back 25 years ago, see where we were, and use the outcome of oil and gas to start envisioning what 25 years from now might look like in geothermal. It's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question. We live in an era of hyper politicization of everything, right? And energy has not been immune to that. Various sources of energy have become politicized in different ways, right? Whether it's wind and solar or oil and gas. I think nuclear is kind of clearing the hurdle a little bit, which is exciting. But I feel like geothermal is one of those sources of energy that actually is getting increasing amounts of bipartisan support. We saw a bill pass out of the House, I think last week, or multiple bills. So how can we prevent, well, in general, like politicization within energy, but specifically like with this nascent technology that could be so instrumental for the U.S. Like, how do we prevent this from becoming like a us versus them?
I think it starts with engagement and education. And I think it's beyond geothermal. We need to have the dialogue around what is the goal if we're talking electricity. What are your priorities with that electron? We've talked to a lot of hyperscalers, and it's normally reliability first, right? They've got 4 nines or 5 nines reliability needs. Secondarily for them, many of them will pay more for low carbon intensity. That's fine. And third, or even low on the list for them because they have such a high multiple in return on their electron to intelligence, right? We're in the era of molecules to megawatts, megawatts to intelligence. That megawatts to intelligence is a huge multiple on value. So the cost of their electron is relatively low on the prioritization list. So having the dialogue around the outcome of the electricity and working backwards is very important because they should be agnostic to fuel source. Define the desired outcome and work backwards. You can accomplish that three priority list I mentioned with coal, natural gas, geothermal. So I think we need to reframe what the desired outcome is and not pre-decide the fuel source that we think is good or bad.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that. Again, I'll go back to energy, top line energy. Electricity is about 20% of the world's energy consumption. We still have 80% that we need to deal with. And so when you think about solving for energy, I always have these three things I press on people. Number one, energy is incredibly important. Okay. Number two, energy demand is growing very, very materially. And number three, there is no free lunch. All forms of energy have costs and trade-offs. And when you get those three truisms kind of like foundationally, then you can start having an intelligent conversation about how do we solve the world's hunger when it comes to energy? How do we think about national security, the position that the United States can play on this? And I think that's a very American perspective that really should rise above partisan politics. And I hate saying that in DC, but that's what I would hope for.
Any parting words, Carlos?
Yeah, no, very well said. I think to go into zooming into the project level is making sure these projects benefit everybody around them. It's not just about one use case; it's about many use cases. Energy has all use cases, and making sure these developments are proactively looking at benefiting everybody around them: communities, the utilities, industry, onshoring goals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's that potential for that, and with energy abundance, that's almost a guarantee.
Wonderful. Thank you. Give it up for our panelists.